Literally, you guys, we're opening all the curtains, pulling back all the curtains for you today.
Getting you in a publication will probably lead to nothing in sales. Nothing. I mean, we talked about that today. Like, listen, Lori, if you get anyone buying Glōci from this, that's going to be a bonus. But let's talk about what it does do. It is the credibility of the being seen in or featured in or mentioned in. Having those name brand recognition media outlets, people just assume that you are an expert. Think about it. You're going to hire a trainer. You're looking at like Yelp or wherever, and they've got similar ratings, or you go to their websites. They could have the same type of results. They can offer similar types of programs. But if you see that one of them's been featured in Women's Health, Women's Fitness, or Refinery 29, or Forbes Health, you're going to say, wow, okay, she's really good. Because she would only be featured in these publications if she knew what she was talking about. She is an expert. And not only are you more likely to select her, you're more likely to pay her extra for her expertise.
Rebecca, welcome to the Earn Your Happy podcast.
I am having like a pinch me moment because one, Lori, you know I'm a huge fan of yours, but I have been listening to this podcast for almost 10 years. It's the first podcast I ever actually listened to on an ongoing basis.
Nothing makes me happier than like having these people on, like having you, someone like you, who's like, I've listened to podcasts forever. I just had Jen Gottlieb on the other day, again, she's been on multiple times, but it's kind of the same thing where it was like, I've listened to your podcast for so long. I'm like, well, you should be on it then. So we're going to talk about your journey because it has been so cool to piece all of the puzzles together, and like me knowing what the puzzles were. Like I know the different people that you worked with and that you've helped and all of these different things. So it's really fun for me to watch how the whole journey has unfolded. And now you guys, everybody listening, there's so many things that Rebecca does that can help you on the journey. And not only that, Rebecca is helping me right now, which I think this is going to be a great conversation because it's so real time with what we're doing together. So I'm going to share just a touch about that too. And then we're going to get in all that you do, Rebecca. So we just literally released our press release today for Glōci, which was so exciting. So tell everyone kind of what a press release does.
Sure. So historically, a press release is put out by a public relations company, and it is some type of informative piece. It could be a company update, in your case, a product release, and it goes out on the wire, they call it. I mean, this is probably like old school days, but it goes out to every publication, TV station, blogs out there, and publications decide, or media outlets decide, are they going to pick it up and republish it? So, it could send out once, and the goal is that many different news outlets pick it up because it's coverage to their audience. It's, massive visibility. And I literally keep refreshing to see like, how many are we getting picked up? But last time I checked, the first press release for Glōci had been picked up by over 350 outlets, multiple ABCs, NBCs, CBS, like all the big ones, all the ones you want to be on. And the idea is to raise awareness, and it's also to build credibility for the brand, the person, whatever it is that's being announced.
Very cool. It's so exciting because this is all stuff I didn't really know. I'd heard of these things, and we're going to get into a lot of things like that, you guys, that can really help you. It's kind of like, okay, why would I want to do a press release? Because also it's kind of the basic stuff where you're like, well, you get to, for the most part, use some of these people's logos on your website. And that's where some of the credibility comes in as well. So this has been a super fun learning experience for me. And for press releases, that's someone who maybe is releasing a book or a product. These are the things that these are good for. So we're going to chat all about this today. We're going to talk about guesting on a podcast profitable. So any of you who have a business, a product, a course, a mastermind, like this is going to be info that you don't want to miss. So Rebecca, let's go back and talk about how our paths initially crossed.
Oh my goodness. So I met you, or kind of I think I became aware of you because you were like on stages, and I was the little peon in the back of the audience.
No.
I was. It's okay. I mean, this is the great thing, is that visibility does wonders. But it was about a decade ago. It was back in 2013, and I was winding up a 13-year career. I didn't realize that at the time, But yeah, I didn't realize it, but that's what happened. So a little background, my degree's in journalism. I worked at a paper firm for years. I realized, like many journalists, I didn't want to have a bartending job to support my journalism habit. So I mean, no joke. I really was like paying my rent with my bartending, and journalism and writing and communicating was my passion. So I went into sales. I'm like, that will make money. And I had a really incredible 13-year career in corporate sales for real estate. And I managed over $1 billion of sales and did a lot of really cool things. And that's where I was when our paths crossed. And I fell into network marketing, which was a great little segue out of corporate while I decided and figured out, what do I really want to do when I grow up? Right?
Totally.
Teaches you a lot about yourself.
Uh-huh. So then I know that Bliss Project was like one of your very first events, which is so crazy to me because you're like, oh, you were on stages. I'm like, some of the first stages. Yes.
Yes. Well, and I have to give a shout out for Chris, because we were sitting at a lunch together at this network marketing company. I had won some rank advancement. I didn't even know what that meant. And I had a great job that paid well. But I will say I was excited about people walking across like the stage and getting to wear whatever they wanted. And not, I had just been censored at work for taking a photo with my shoulders showing. And I'm like, seriously? Literally, it was a gorgeous photo, but my shoulders showed. It was like a halter and very professional. And the HR was like, you need to have this reshot. This is not appropriate. I was the youngest female VP for a publicly traded company. So anything else looked really attractive. I'm an Enneagram 7, like your husband. I'm like, freedom, ultimate choices. Don't box me in. So I ended up sitting next to Chris at a luncheon, and he just could not have been kinder. And I was already fangirling over you. I didn't tell him that. But, he was so kind, and I'm like, how do I say this in a way that doesn't sound weird? I told him I was about to leave corporate America. He's like, here's my number. Shoot me a text when you're about to leave, and I can give you some strategies that I wish I would have used when I was leaving. And, he had nothing to gain. And it's always nice when you have like your role models and you find out that they're just as wonderful in real life as they are when they're, in front of people.
I love that. Yeah, we're like, yes, give us your number so we can recruit you.
Unfortunately, I was already in the organization.
Just kidding, you're already in it.
So, I'm one of those people that when I find something, like I go for it. And that was 2013. I left my job that year. And I left my job in 2014. So my very first event I went to after I left my job was the Bliss Project. And I brought 3 women with me. I was like, we're going to have 4 of us in the room. It's going to be a party. And it was incredible. I mean, you did a beautiful job, like building community and making people feel safe, and, like everything was possible. I remember, I think it was Danette. She read from a children's book. I want to say it was like, I don't remember. I think it was Dr. Seuss, but it really felt magical. And it planted a seed in me, like your podcast, that I can do these things. I don't know how, but someday I want to do these things. And that's where we are now.
This is so fun because you had an incredible career before, but then that's a major pivot, like to be, doing network marketing and then doing what you're doing now. And so for anybody listening, like there are keys to doing major pivots into what you love and what you enjoy. And I know that you love this so much because you really put incredible women on blast. Like that is your job. You get to elevate them, their voice, their hard work. You get to celebrate wins together. And you've created an awesome business out of it. Like getting women media coverage or getting them paid by, being guests on podcasts. Like what an awesome career. Like what made you kind of figure this part of your career out?
I did not leave my corporate job. I mean, I left it with the idea that network marketing will provide it'll provide a loan that I don't have to pay back while I'm building my career. But I went into business coaching because I had said my last year, I think I managed 400 million in sales, and I had teams. I think I had 48 employees at the end, and I knew I was good at people development. I was great at buy-in. I loved mentoring. So I was like, well, coaching makes sense. And that's what I did for the first 4 or 5 years. But I reached a point where I started getting really frustrated because I was like, this isn't going as fast as I would like. And I knew that like I'm sure the woman out there listening is feeling this. She's like, you know, you're good. You know, you bring value. And yet you feel like, when have I arrived? When am I going to get the person anointing me that I'm now the expert in this? Or, when is it going to get easier? When am I going to make more money? And I was getting frustrated because not only did I feel like pretty plateaued, but at the time I was about to have I had had my first child. I was pregnant with my second. And I'm like, my time is diminishing. And every hour I'm spending away from my family or doing something outside of, work is an hour I better be getting paid well for. And I kind of asked myself, I'm like, well, what can I do to be seen as the expert? What can I do to increase my credibility and my visibility and my rates, right? And I'm like, I don't want only my clients to know that I'm great. Like, that's a problem when someone hires you. You're like, this is so much better than I expected. You're like, no, this should not be a surprise,
Yeah.
And what came to me from my journalism days is, oh, you need PR. I never studied PR. My degree was in old school print journalism, like back in 2002. But, I knew a little bit about PR. And I interviewed a few different PR agencies in 2017 and 18. And they all said the same thing: $5,000 a month, 6-month minimum. And I have a sales and marketing background. So I was like, okay, well, what are my deliverables? What are the results I can track? How is this going to lead to more sales? Like, I was asking those questions and I was getting these blank stares. And it was a lot of, well, just visibility is good. And I'm like, yes, but in my old sales world where we were selling to people walking through the door, we were selling homes. I was like, I get that if you have a certain amount of people walking through the door, then you can look at conversion ratios, but there seemed like there was no formula in PR. And so I opted out. I was like, I'm not going to invest 30,000 plus on something that I can't see a return. However, I took a friend of mine who owned a little niche PR agency. She specialized in fashion tech. So she's like, you're not my ideal client. She didn't try to pitch me. And I took her out for a manicure pedicure. And I said, I hate this saying, but like, can I pick your brain? I'm like, I'll pay for your mani-pedi. Can I ask you questions? And she just gave me 2 or 3 tips. And I gave myself permission to be a student, to be a beginner, to get curious. And I was like, let me just see if I can figure this out on my own. And again, I have a degree in journalism, so I had a certain level of understanding. And in the next year, putting in about, I would say less than an hour a week, I was able to get featured or mentioned in 20 national publications for free. Wow. So that's how it started. I never intended to teach people this, but as I was getting those results and I was like, wow, one, I'm getting fully booked. I'm now waitlisted. I'm raising my rates. I'm getting more opportunities because of this idea that I'm more credible, which I want to tell everyone, just because you're published doesn't make you more credible. But for women, especially if we deal with imposter syndrome, it does feel different and it gets people to pay attention and it differentiates. And whether that's right or wrong, it just is. So if the game is there, let's like play the game. And then I had a client who actually was my old national VP of sales. And I was working with her on the side and she's like, Rebecca, how are you getting this media? Like, who are you working with? I said, I'm not working with anyone. She's like, what? She's like, well, teach me. And at the time I was like, I don't want to teach you because I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. You're getting results. And I like to have mastery of something before I teach it. And I said, okay, fine. And I would like to say that she got results as good as mine, but she didn't. She got much better results. Because she didn't have to start at the beginning. She was starting from what I knew then. And I think in the first 60 days, she was featured in Forbes, Today, like 10 publications. She got several podcast guest spots. She got speaking opportunities, clients. And that's when I started thinking, wait a second. And I started teaching it as workshops when we were, in person. I started teaching it at a little business I had called Brand Camp. We were doing retreats. And it was always the fan favorite because no one knew that it could be so accessible to get visibility that was not social media.
Okay, let's dive into that for 1 second before we get into the 4 Ps, which is so amazing. It's going to help you guys so much. Let's talk about like why media and when it's a fit, because there are parts of it that are so important. There are parts of it that, yes, they're a little aged out, like they're not really relevant anymore. And we'll tell you some reasons why maybe they are, and you still want certain parts of it. So let's talk about like media and being seen and why this is important for like all types. Let's talk all types of brands and products.
Absolutely. So First is to understand that social media is not visibility if
Mhm.
people are not seeing you outside of your following. And typically it's a very small percentage of your following. People think that social is visibility, but visibility is typically new eyes on your business.
Mm.
Social media is typically nurture, like your email list is nurture, right? Unless, yes, if you go viral, but that's so hard to plan for. You can't really expect that to happen. And so what I realized quickly is visibility with media or with podcasting or speaking is typically in front of a new audience. And that's the goal, because you can have a tiny following, but do really well leveraging other people's audiences, right? As you're building your own. I mean, even when you're podcasting, you start out with your own podcast and you're like, you want to guest on other podcasts to bring people over to listen to yours, to
Mhm.
have them follow you. So that was one, as I was like, okay, this is visibility. And I didn't realize that going in. Right.
Mm.
All of these lessons and the things I'm sharing are what I realized as it was happening real time.
Mm.
I went, wow, I did this podcast and they happened to stream it live. And I had 300 people opt in for my freebie that day. Right. I'm like,
Mm.
what would it do? I mean, to have your email list grow by 300, that would be ads, or something that the average person, the average service-based business or small product-based business, that's going to take them a long time. So
Mhm.
I realized that. And then the biggest thing was the way people perceived me,
Mm.
right? Is I had clients that were like, oh my gosh, I just told my friend that my coach was in, women's health and they want to meet you or they want an intro. It's kind of like you think about, we go to like our hairstylist and I still
Mhm.
have pinned like your amazing like extension shot from the woman you go to. But I mean, because it's so
Yeah.
pretty. But you think about your hairstylist and like we all love our hairstylist, right? We all like an intimate relationship because they know everything and they touch our head. But if your hairstylist gets named like best colorist in OC, you're going to be even more likely to tell someone about her.
For
And
sure.
yeah, and it justifies the rates. So like the woman I
Mhm.
see in Palo Alto, because she does New York Fashion Week, because she's a trainer for Aveda, her rates are, I don't even want to tell you.
Right.
It is obscene, but guess what? She's fully booked out. And is there someone else down the street that charges a quarter of what she does? That's just as good? Probably. But it's the perception of the credibility from these outside sources. On social media, we're usually calling ourselves an expert.
Mhm.
And when someone is introducing you on a podcast or on a stage, or a publication is featuring you as an expert, it's third party endorsement.
Mhm. So much changes and so little changes. Like so much changes in terms of like yes, you people start talking about you, you get credibility. You don't necessarily see the lift off that right away. You have to really utilize that lift. And we'll talk about that too. But let's get into the 4 Ps because you have these 4 Ps that are going to help us pretty much like be seen and help elevate everything that we're doing.
The one thing I also want to mention is this is all fun.
Mhm.
And Enneagram 7 here, so that's like the enthusiast. There is a lot of good ideas that you're like, okay, that's working for so and so. And I know the statistics are great on it, but you don't want to do it.
Mhm.
Everything that I'm sharing is fun. I mean, if you have any extrovert in you at all, or if you're just excited, and like, who is not excited to talk about their business, right? I
Mhm.
mean, if you are an entrepreneur, you love talking about it. And most of the time, the challenge is finding people that want to hear about it, right?
So true.
So here's like, this is your ideal audience. They want to hear, they want to learn. And the other thing is that, like I said, it's free. So everything I'm going to share with you can be done for free. That doesn't mean you always want to do it for free. You want to scale eventually, maybe, but there's no barrier of entry. And that's where I'm really passionate about being a gatekeeper remover, is not
Mm.
that PR agencies are bad. And I actually have multiple clients that own PR agencies. It's that the average person, if they're not making $250,000 a year plus in their business, they'll never be able to afford PR.
It's
And
so true. Yep.
and I want to help someone that's starting out or at 50,000 get to 250. And I've seen that happen.
I mean, even for me with like we're such a Glōci is such a small company right now that it's like we can't allocate those particular funds for PR because it's like it doesn't make sense for us right now. So it like meaning the traditional PR, which can be absolutely crazy. Like majority of PR is like 9 grand a month.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, you don't, it's sometimes way more than that. I've gotten quoted, 20 grand a month, 25 grand by certain people. And I'm like, it's not feasible for small businesses at all. Like it's not going to be there until you have a giant company. So, but you need it, but you need these certain things. So you guys, this is so important to learn because it does give a lot more credibility. I'm telling you, when the first time I even got a magazine cover, I didn't quite realize what it did until, a year later, but it was what you said, Rebecca. It's what people are saying about you when you're being introduced.
Yes.
And it gets people's attention. And that's when people are like, how do you get your foot in the door? There's a lot of things that go into it, but this is definitely something that when they're introducing you, it makes their ears perk up and go, oh, well, she got noticed by them. It must be someone I should be noticing as well. Okay. So 4 P's. First P, go for it.
Let's talk about podcasts because we're on a podcast.
Great.
And it's one of my favorites. Yeah, I have my podcast. I love podcasts for many reasons. So we'll go through a couple of them. So one is just podcast listeners, right? Something like 170 million households or Americans are listening to podcasts, which has been increasing every year. And it's also the household income of podcast listeners. If you look at the different platforms, TikTok versus Instagram versus LinkedIn, podcast listeners are more like LinkedIn, like 100 to 150,000 average household income, where we think about how much time we can spend on Instagram trying to go viral is a 60,000 average household income.
Interesting.
So more than double. And this is one of the biggest things. 74% of podcast listeners actually engage to learn. So if you consider yourself a subject matter expert in whatever, right? It can be a very specific niche. There is someone that is wanting to learn. The other percentage, actually 47% say they want to learn for inspiration. So we'll talk later about the 3 I's of impact anytime you're speaking. But this is the craziest part is more than half of podcast listeners have bought a product they've heard about during an episode. And that's from an advertisement. That is not from what I call story selling, which is selling never. And I will say never sell on someone else's platform. You should never do that. But it's more of like, are you selling them on who you are, on your expertise, and ideally moving them to the next stage of you following you on either social media or opting in for something that you're giving away.
Okay. So with this, before we go on to the next P, I do want to say, because there are people who are like, okay, that sounds amazing. You have something called the Profitable Podcast Guest. Tell me what that is and why you started it, because I'm like, okay, I might actually need this too, because I'm going on so many podcasts. I just need like the little tweaks to make sure I'm capturing the eyes, because I can't tell you, Rebecca, how many times I've gone on a podcast and been like, did I make sure to capture that audience? Like, did I go on with intention or did I just go on to answer questions? So let's chat.
So I'm going to tell a story here.
Okay.
And this is going to get you to pay attention. And again, I did this and I realized after the fact, that's where all the things I realized, I'm like, oh, wow, this worked. And then I look at it, I'm like, what worked really well. So I had one podcast guest spot. Sometimes some podcasts like air to their Facebook groups if they have a Facebook group, or sometimes they air live. So this specific podcast host was airing it live to a Facebook group. So I think there were a few thousand people in the Facebook group. Now that does not mean they were all looking at it right then. And they had advertised it on an email. So there were a couple of hundred people over the 24 hours from the time it was recorded that watched it based on the views. Okay. So just want to give you those analytics. That podcast, I tracked $47,000 of business in 1 week too.
Wow.
And this is not a big podcast. So a little truth talk, because I think a lot of people make money claims, especially in online business. And I want to make sure the math adds up. So I did that. The episode was 45 minutes. It took me about 15 minutes to pitch it for. So let's say it was an hour. 340 people listened over that 24 hours. And I reached out to the host. I think there was about 1,000 downloads in the first month. That's not a lot.
No
way. Right. That's like my podcast gets more, yours gets like a million times more. That's not a lot. So this is a smallish podcast. 104 listeners followed me on social the first day. And here's what I did. This is where we say, like, you have to still do the work.
Yeah.
Whenever someone followed me, it was a podcast related to like health coaching. It was for aspiring health coaches or health coaches. So anytime someone followed me that I could tell looked like they were probably a health coach, I just had a little custom message I sent them. This is before mini chat. And I basically invited them into a masterclass I was doing at the time. Out of the 104, 17 registered for the masterclass. 8 of them showed up live and 4 became clients that week. at around a $7,000 price point, which was $28K. And one of them joined my mastermind, which was $19K at the time. That would have never happened if I hadn't provided value. But I think so many entrepreneurs are providing value. They're just providing it in the wrong places.
Okay. So you went on with intention though, like you told a story, you had an idea of how you were going to guide them and what you were going to do. So where do people go wrong when they go on podcasts, and how can we make sure, give us a couple tips, even if we're not getting the profitable podcast guests, which you guys should go and get anyway. But give us a couple tips on how we can go on these podcasts with intention.
So let's talk just about when you show up on the podcast, then I'll give some tips about how to get on the podcast and not be one of the spammy people that I get, and I'm sure you get so many of. So I call this the 3 I's of impact. And by the way, this is great for podcasts, but it also works if you're speaking on stage. It works if you're doing a workshop, anytime that you are showing up as like an expert. So the first is information. You have to give away some of the good stuff. It can't be all hype, hype, hype. Like, you need to give away real value. And I like to think about this as if someone never followed me, never saw me again, like they just listened to this episode, could they walk away feeling like I was served value by Rebecca? So you want to make sure the answer is yes. So give some of the how-to. You know, often I think we're told like gatekeep the how-to, tell them the what and the why, but like all the how-to is behind a paywall. And I'm a fan of like giving people how-to. What they're paying for with the paywall is proximity and probably like higher level resources. The second I is inspiration, and that's belief. Okay? So this can be done by like I'm telling you, you know, some of my stories. It's telling stories or giving examples. The reason I like to use stories that aren't just yours as the expert is if someone is listening, let's say they're listening to you, Lori, even though you are so real and so authentic and so down to earth, it's really easy for them to put you on a pedestal. But if you're sharing a story of someone that's closer to where they're at, it's going to bridge that gap. And the goal with the inspiration is not just to motivate them, but really that they're like, okay, I think I can do this. Right. And I'll give you a story here. One of my clients, Erin, is such a sweetheart. She's such an introvert. She is like, I don't want to do podcasts. She joined my program just to learn how to do media. She's like, if I can get some logos, I'll feel good. And she literally, the first podcast she ever pitched was Natalie Jill's. Her first podcast was like 10,000 plus downloads on her first episode. Like, this was a person terrified of public speaking, and she did not die. Okay. And she did a great job, and it gave her the confidence. So giving that example of someone who is not an introvert or extrovert, who's not a polished speaker, that they can show up and do it. And by the way, she got clients from it. Right, is really important. So inspiration, belief, and you do that through storytelling. The third, and this is so important, and I think it's the thing that so many people miss, is the integration or implementation. So what are you giving them that they can then take and get into action on? Because even if I taught everyone listening everything I know about media and visibility and how to actually monetize it, even if I gave you every story that you could believe it, life is going to happen. And if I don't give you a tangible step that moves you into action and momentum, you probably aren't going to keep going. So those are the 3 things. And that is how you can, you know, show up. And if you do those 3 things, it's going to be a great episode. Someone's going to have learned, they're going to feel feelings, and they're going to have something that they can actually do when the episode's over.
How do you feel about like having freebies and different things like that to get them opted in while you're on there?
So I think that's very important. And that's part of, I call it my profit method for podcasting. However, I think a lot of people do it poorly. So, and this is freebies in general, is the freebie needs to not be some like random thing that you designed 2 years ago that was where you were going. It needs to be where you were. It needs to be where you're going. So I actually am a fan of having a few different ones based on your expert topics. Right. And you shouldn't wait till the very end to be like, oh, here's where you grab my thing, because most people are already tuning out. They're doing other things. It needs to be in the episode where you're delivering massive value, and it needs to be a next step to taking that value further.
Yeah. I noticed, just, you know, through 1,100 episodes, the people who do it the best on my podcast to like capture my audience for whatever they're talking about are the ones who it's a part of what they're already talking about. So kind of literally, you guys, you can like, we're opening all the curtains, pulling back all the curtains for you today. Like what we're doing right now. You're talking about podcasts. It's one of your 4 Ps. And then you have something to offer through it. Like,
Yes.
so people will go, and we'll put this in show notes. They're literally going to go and look at the show notes because we talked about it. And it was like, the giveaway or the freebie needs to be a part of the answer, and it's just an extended piece of the answer that people are looking for. So I've noticed that whenever people, like if they get a lot of opt-ins from my podcast, it's typically because if someone came on who's like a marriage expert, they're like, and so I actually built a freebie on this so you guys could really go in depth with it. But the things I point out in that guide that I'm giving you that are we'll put it in the show notes is this. So they teach on what is in that particular freebie as well. But
and then ideally they share a story of what someone did with that. So
yes.
I'm a big fan of calling it a listener gift. Again, we're doing like the behind the scenes, like, pull back the curtain. So if I was, normally I'd say like, oh, and I actually have a gift for your listeners, Lori, and let me tell you what it's for. So I'll tell you all mine. I mean, I've got a couple, but the one that I really love, and I mean, it's resulted in like over 6,000 downloads and opt-ins, is called the Irresistible 4-in-1 Pitch Templates. And it's how to pitch to podcast, publications, TV, and speaking. It's my four B's, right? And I had a client, and I love her. She came in and she's like, I don't think this is going to work. She's like, I think what you're teaching is fluff. And I was like, okay, game on. I'm like, listen, like try me, right? And she used the pitch templates. And I typically tell people, if you do a good job and you follow the process in the Profitable Podcast Guest, you should book a third of podcasts, because I like to be realistic. She booked 9 podcasts in an hour, and those 9 podcasts led to over 5 figures of business. And I'm like, I'm so glad that you proved me, that I proved her wrong, but in the nicest way. So it does work. And I'll even give like a little extra for anyone that downloads it. I don't want it to be shelf help that is like sitting with all your other opt-ins and freebies, in some email folder. Take it down. You can literally just copy mine. You can tweak it for yourself and pitch me. My emails, you're going to get an email from me with it. So it's Rebecca@Cafiero.com. If you pitch me, here's what will happen. Best case, you get to be on my podcast. Second is I will give you some critiques about what you could improve. The worst case is you hear nothing back. There's no rejection, because no one ever responds no. They only respond yes or nothing.
That's so true. Okay, I love this. You guys go check that out. It is in the show notes. There you go. We taught on it and we did it. Okay, let's move into publications.
All right. So publications are like old school PR. And there are strategies of how this is visibility, but I'm really honest with people. I'm like, listen, getting you in a publication will probably lead to nothing in sales. Nothing. Nothing. I mean, we talked about that. Like, listen, Lori, if you get anyone buying Glōci from this, that's going to be a bonus. But let's talk about what it does do, right? It is the credibility of the being seen in or featured in or mentioned in. So it's, whether it's on your website or on your social media or in your bio, having those name brand recognition media outlets, people just assume that you are an expert. And I'm going off the assumption that everyone that's listening who has a business is an expert in their space. This is not about pretending that we're anyone that we're not. But you think about it, you're going to hire a trainer, right? And you're looking at like, Yelp or wherever, and they've got similar ratings, or you go to their websites, they could have the exact same, certifications, pedigree. They could have the same type of results. They could offer similar types of programs. But if you see that one of them's been featured in women's health and women's fitness or Refinery 29 or, Forbes Health, you're going to say, wow, okay, she's really good, because she would only be featured in these publications if she knew what she was talking about. She is an expert. And not only are you more likely to select her, you're more likely to pay her extra for her expertise. So I like to look at publications for a few different things. For someone in a service-based industry, it's going to validate their rates. It's going to differentiate. It makes conversion easier. For product-based, same thing, because there's a lot of products out there, right? And for a lot of businesses, I'm in Silicon Valley, and so often I'm working with founders who are doing additional raises of capital. And it's one of those like subliminal things on a deck that if you've already gotten, ideally you've also like made money, but if you've already gotten media exposure, it looks really good to angel investors or venture capitalists. So it just, there's no way that it hurts you. And if you get published in something you don't like, you just don't use the logo.
Totally. I love that. And you guys, when you go to people's sites and it's like featured in XYZ, all of these things, I am more likely to buy something if I see that it's been picked up by all those things. Like whether it's a beauty product or whether it's a supplement, I'm like, okay, well, this feels way more legit than this other one that doesn't have any of these on here. And
It
it's
bridges
just,
the trust.
yes, absolutely. And also, it says something about that person that they took the time to make this important enough to go and get those things. Like that I think of that even now, especially in the product world. I'm kind of like, oh, like they put in effort to make sure they are seen. And you do have to do a lot more work to be somebody who is picked up
Mhm.
by those people in
Absolutely.
outlets because they don't want someone who doesn't look credible for them either. So I just know that more effort went into that product or that thing when I see those logos.
Absolutely. And if you are seeing someone on social media and it has a little, seen in, what it gets you to do is spend an extra 6 seconds looking at whatever it is, right? It
Mhm.
really is buying us more time. And the other thing is logos are evergreen. So you could have been featured once, but you can use those versus again, highlight reels or some of the other things that are so you're hoping it gets you, it gets you eyes on you for 24 hours or 48 hours. Or I was listening to your podcast with Jen Kutcher. It might be months, but like a logo you can use forever.
That's so true. Okay, any last piece on publications?
I think the biggest thing is that don't feel like you're not ready.
Mm.
That's one of the biggest things I get with my clients is they're like, well, I just don't know if I have enough experience. So really diving into what makes you unique. And I think when you hear that and people are like, ugh, I don't know. So I like to look at what are the areas that I'm an expert. So for me, it's
Mm.
visibility, it's business growth. And then the third one is like life optimization. I'm like a life optimizing nerd. And underneath that, I'm like, okay, well, within those, what are the subcategories that I could talk about on a podcast or I would create social media content on. And then you get into like really what is niched about you. And it's really important if you're pitching. And by the way, I'm going to give you the best resource out there for everyone that is free. It's like a dating site for journalists and sources or experts,
Mm.
but don't be vanilla. And this is the same on social. It's the same in your email marketing. This doesn't mean try to be controversial. But I'll give another example. I had a client who was doing some pitching for free. And when I say pitching, I'm not talking about writing up an article and like sending it to some editor at a scary magazine. I'm talking about going to a website where 100,000 reporters are and producers, and when they have an article that they're working on, they're like, hey, I'm looking for this type of expert to share this. And you can give them bullet points that they will quote you.
Mm.
They usually don't even talk to you. I've been featured hundreds of times now. I think I've had 3 interviews ever that weren't through email.
Mm.
It's like, you don't have to get out of your Zoom outfit, right? And so anyway, I told her, I looked at her pitches. I'm like, these are so vanilla. They're so basic. It's like the first thing that any person off the street would say. And so I said,
Mm.
she's kind of snarky. I'm like, be a little snarky, be your personality. Like if you're
Yeah.
funny, be funny. If you're optimistic, be optimistic, but like be yourself with a professional, polish. The next pitch that she did, the question was, what is the best time of day to work out? And you think about what are the obvious answers? First thing in the morning, right? No excuses, or at lunch, or whenever you can fit it in. That's basically it. And her answer was, again, she took a stance. It has nothing to do with the time of day. You should be
Mm.
working out around your cycle.
Mm.
She got picked up not only in that publication, but then that reporter started going back to her anytime they were talking about hormones. She ended up getting 9 publications and was named #1 trainer in North America by that first publication. She didn't even have to
Mm.
pitch for it.
That's so good. Okay, one last thing I want to say about
Yes.
publications is so many people, if they're not using it once they get it, let's chat about that quick because I watched so many girls in my arena and fitness get covers of magazines and they didn't know how to use them. Like they
Mm,
didn't use them in other pitches for speaking. They didn't put them out on their social media. They didn't include them in their email. So I'll just give an example and hopefully people can start to see themselves in it as well. Like if I were to get a cover today, I mean, I did a really good job of it back then, but something I would do would be like, I would throw a party for like a release and I'd invite people and we would like have the magazine everywhere and I'd take my own pictures and make my own media. And then whenever I would put that up on my website and write a little blurb about it, I'd send it out in a newsletter. I would put it up on my social. I would continue to always do like a throwback on my social of like, that one time I got the fitness cover, blah, blah, blah. Like you need to continue to make it come alive in
Mhm.
order to make that media really, really work for you.
100%. I call it social proofing.
Mm,
And so it's, I put this in my email signature. You never know who's going to see your email signature. Read about me in the recent article in blank.
mm,
1,000% media, whatever form, speaking, podcasting, publications, like all of it is so incredible for content because you can pull a quote out for carousels, right? You can have a reel if it's a speaking engagement or a podcast or TV. I mean, there's just so many different ways to use it. You can literally ask ChatGPT, how can I reuse this media feature? But you
mm,
need to talk about it. It
mhm,
needs to be in your bio on social media. And as you get bigger publications, put the bigger ones there. But in the beginning, it might be like, hey, I was in this like little local one, and then it's bigger and bigger. But talk about it. And to your point, there's no expiration. So I tell my clients, listen, when you've got a couple of wins, I want you to share those every week because only 3% of your audience saw it anyway. And then as you get new ones, you can rotate those in. You can have an
mhm,
as seen in highlight reel. You can have an as seen in on your website and absolutely update your bio, your professional bio. And a lot of people tell me, well, I don't have a bio. If you don't have a bio of who you are today, you're probably not even putting yourself out there or energetically like putting yourself in the frequency of opportunity where you would have a bio that needs to be read.
mm. So good. Okay, let's move on to presenting.
It's my favorite. So this is speaking on stages. You could also do TV, right? What's beautiful about this is it's usually great video.
Mm,
And yes, there's a lot of people that can sit behind their desk and be featured in media because they're typing information. People can podcast. Like you don't have to be outgoing to podcast because it's an intimate conversation. But there's a
mhm,
different level of authority when you are on TV or you're speaking. And I heard a quote years ago, which I will amend because it was she or he who holds the mic makes the money.
mm,
I would like to say makes the impact because it's your chance to like put the microphone to your message.
mm,
You are seen as an expert when you are that person that is like in 3 dimension talking. But I will share in presenting, right? TV, I feel like everyone's like, TV is the top. I am about every month a guest on a national business show, and they're in 40 million households. I don't know that I've ever had a client from them,
wow.
ever. I
Mhm,
know for product based, it's better for lower, lower price point. But I've done the show, dozens of times. And here's what I do with it. I put it on my social for my reels, right? I will put it out in an email newsletter. I utilize that coverage to continue to show myself as an expert or an expert in that niche in whatever I'm talking about. But my favorite is speaking like real in time. So obviously on a stage, if you can, not everyone can always do that with travel. Today I spoke to a mastermind group of 20 women on Zoom. And it's because you can fake it for 60 seconds. Like social media is not real. Obviously, some people are much more real on social. But when you're speaking on a podcast, let's say for 45 minutes, or doing a keynote, or TV, maybe less though, because of sound bites, like you get the real you. People feel your energy,
yeah.
right? They're seeing you, they're feeling you, like it's as many of the senses as are engaged. And I have found that speaking specifically is the highest conversion, especially for thought leaders or service-based businesses, as well as product-based businesses. So I recommend everyone get out there and like think about what stage can I be on, even if it's a virtual stage.
Mm,
And if you're like, well, how do I apply to be on a stage if I've never been on one? Because media begets media or visibility begets visibility. Go hire your photographer when you're doing a brand shoot, get a peer space, which is like Airbnb, but you can rent a room and get photos of you. You can do a speaking role without actually ever having keynoted.
mhm, mhm. This is so huge. We just did a mastermind with a bunch of my girlfriends, and one of them is like an incredible speaker. And she was like, I just want to be getting more speaking gigs. And I was like, when I go to your Instagram page, I don't see you speaking. So how do other people know you're speaking? Like that you want to speak? And because she was asking me, like, how do you get all of these speaking things? I'm like, they see me as a speaker because I
Yes.
have a reel every other week with me on a stage. So they're like, if she's on a stage, she must be getting booked on stages. Like someone has already done the homework for us. She's a speaker. Great. She can speak. And honestly, it's like one of the easiest hacks that you can do is just constantly show yourself on a stage to get booked
Yes.
on stage. And
And
just
you
like
can
with
create your own stage.
you. Oh, make your own. Absolutely. Create your own stages. And in the beginning, I did create my own stage, Rebecca. It was like the Bliss Project. That's how I started getting booked on other stages. Is they're like, well, if she made her own stage and people come, then she must be okay on a different stage. Because that is a tough thing to break through for people. It's like, well, if I don't speak somewhere, then how do I get the opportunity to speak? Well, create the illusion of speaking and make sure they hear
100%.
you speak. Like, or have a podcast where they have to hear what you do. So even if you're faking it on a stage, but they hear that you're good, then that's going to be the thing that pushes them over the edge in that position. So, or making that decision, I mean.
Yes. And a little thing we do for a lot of our clients when they haven't been on a stage where we have like actual footage, or they've been on a stage and sometimes the footage is terrible. So bring your own videographer if you can, is if you've been on a podcast and you've got sound bites that can be pulled, then you can have those, we call it B-roll, right? Where you're not actually speaking, but like you're holding a mic against a white wall and you're acting like you're speaking. And that can be turned into a speaking reel with clips of that with your voice over, because it's obviously it's not a voiceover, as well as the podcast clips. I had about 80 speaker applications last year for Weekend at the Pitch Club. And I will tell you what stood out. Yes, if someone had a speaker reel, it showed me they were taking it seriously. I know, okay, they're going to show up well, even if it wasn't the best reel. Some people sent me like Instagram reels, which is okay because it shows me they're speaking. But I would like to hear their voice. So it's like do a podcast spot with a speaking reel. But I had one woman that blew me out of the water. I didn't know who she was. And I let her open up my VIP night because she sent me a personalized video. She's like, hey, Rebecca, this is Sarah. I can't wait to serve your women at Weekend at the Pitch Club. It was like 2 minutes. And I was just so blown away by her creativity. So if you don't have the experience, at least get creative.
I love that. All right. Let's go into power partners, our final P.
Yes. So power partners is not theoretically related to media. So this is like my old school fact that I got started in my career 22 years ago now. So when I was selling real estate, I would think about like, okay, how am I going to use my time? If I have 5 homes to sell in my new home development, I could call 25 prospects that were in my lead bank, or I could call 5 realtors who were each working with 5 clients. And I was #1 sales in the year for a massive company. I mean, I think I sold 155 homes that year because I leveraged working with other agents. I had one agent that brought me 47 clients over 2 years. And that's what power partners are in business. So I'll give you a few examples. Think about who serves the same audience as you, but does not compete with you. Like they're a step before you in the journey or a step after. So they're usually who your clients are like, hey, after I work with you, what do I do? Right? So for a service-based business, if someone's a interior designer, it's like, what's the architect, the landscape designer, the moving company? If you are a health coach, maybe it's a business coach. If you're a business coach, it's a health coach, a life coach, a therapist, a financial planner, all of those things, because you could package yourself as a toolkit and give a better client experience, and you can get so many referrals. So, I mean, I have a 7-figure business, and I would say we've ran a little bit of ads, but about 90% of our business revenue, about 70%, 65-70% comes from visibility. And the rest of it comes from power partners, straight referrals. And most of the times they're not sales calls, they're fitting calls. They're like, you already know about me. I've heard, you've heard about me, and they convert so much better. And it's just a smoother process. You don't have to sell yourself. So find a power partner. And I mean, for product based, it would be what other types of businesses offer something that avatar that cares about gut health, right? Cares about their skin. Like maybe it's a really clean skincare product. And you're like, here, we're going to hit you on both ends, right? Or maybe it's like, okay, this is a woman that cares about her body. She's going to be working out. Maybe it's someone that does like athletic wear, and they can package it in like their bundles. So want to think about like, where could my business not necessarily be actually bundled, but where could there be leverage from businesses? And the other thing just about this is business is lonely if we don't create a community around us. And so I want you to think about this as a way to like work with people you really enjoy. And I mean, in January, I went on a trip to Mexico with like 7 women that we called it a business trip. It was a lot of fun. And 4 or 5 of those are my power partners. We refer tons of business back and forth, but understand you have to refer to get it back. I refer about $1 million a year in business. And I know that's a big reason why I get a large amount back.
It's such an important piece for anyone and everyone. And I think that collaboration, it's going to be, you have to try, like trial and error as well. Some people are going to reciprocate, some won't. Don't waste your energy on worrying about the people who don't, and just keep trying to find those like perfect fits. And being really upfront with like what the expectation is from the start. I think having those like really real, honest expectation conversations when you do kind of do these different partnerships and things. But it is so powerful. And like you said, it's so much more fun. Like it is
So much more
way
fun.
better. It's like consumers want to consume. You're not going to be in any sort of lack situation if you're sharing with someone else who has a complementary product that's not the same. So
and often you're actually saving your clients time and money, because if you think about it, if they have to, like they finish with you. So I'll say brand photographer, someone's getting their brand photos done when they're about to get their website redone, or they need a copywriter. If you don't refer someone that you know works really well with you, that is complementary to like your vision and the way that you do business, there's a chance they're going to go out and have a negative experience. And I learned this because I was like, I don't want to be the hub for 5 different people with all of these different ideas that may tell my client something that doesn't align with what I'm sharing. And they're going to be confused on strategy. So I think it's so helpful.
all right, Rebecca. So if anybody's asking themselves right now, they're listening, this all sounds super great, but they're like, I don't necessarily know how to put like who I'm going to be known for out there. How do we figure that out?
This is a super easy question to answer. And I will say, I also dealt with this. Because often we're like, well, I could talk about all these things, but what do I really want to be known for? So I recommend going to your Instagram, and you can look at your analytics, go where you can see how many people saved a post, right? So if you created something that's shareable, it's usually like a carousel, it's a quote. But if it's something that they want to come back to, they're going to save it. So go look through all of your save statistics. And maybe 1.5 or 2 years ago, I had one that was about how do I get out of overwhelm in 10 minutes or less? And it was super scrappy. Like I wrote it, and because I was dealing with overwhelm, and I'm like, how do I get out of this? And I'm like, oh, that really worked. And so I shared it. I had something like 289 saves. It was wild. Wow. And what that told me, and a lot of comments, but it was more saves. Sometimes people don't engage in comments, but they're like, oh, I love this. So that turned into a podcast episode on my podcast. Plus I've talked about it on a lot of other podcasts. It's one of my favorite things when I'm not talking about visibility. I've talked about it on TV multiple times. I've talked about it on stages. I now have a lead magnet around it. So look at where you've created content that people are really interested, because if they're interested in reading about it there, they'll want to read about it somewhere else.
Okay. That's so amazing. All right. So you guys, she's got 2 things that if you're like, I absolutely need to be figuring this out because this is huge for me. We have the profitable podcast guest is one that's in the show notes. Then we have the media magnet, which tell the people, give the people what they want. Tell me about the media.
The media magnet is a course that tells you how to get like media on an ongoing basis. So first we dive into like how to get those logos. Now, obviously how to be seen as a thought leader. So how to pitch. And we also go into how to get features. And I have never had someone go through it and actually do the work. You have to do it. It doesn't happen by osmosis, and not get features. In fact, everyone that has gone through, and we're talking hundreds of people now, have had a full feature. So it's so powerful. And now that will give you some of those logos and really that confidence that's going to get you ready for some of the bigger opportunities, the stages and the TV. We do go through TV as well. So we go through everything but podcast on it. And the biggest thing I talk about is how you actually make profit from this. So my profit method, I'll give you the high notes, is you've got to pitch. You have to put yourself out there. None of this works if you're not willing to. Relationship building is another really big one with reporters and journalists on how to become their best friend. I have one journalist that I met through a dating site. It's called Connectively. But I pitched her with bullet points. She published it. She reached out to me a few months later, said, "Hey, I'm writing another article. Would you like to be quoted?" I said, "Absolutely." I sent her a box fox after, because I was just like, "Thanks so much." She put me in US News and World Report. The article got like 130,000 views. So I
Yeah.
sent her a little gift and we ended up becoming friends. I mean, I didn't buy her friendship, but we became friends. She introduced me to 3 TV producers. Most people
Mm.
don't know that the media world is so small and there's almost no staff reporters anymore. Like I was actually on with my media coach yesterday prepping for this, and she writes for the New York Times, Cosmo, Shape, like all of these different publications. Most freelancers write for multiple publications. So if you are fast and responsive and pleasant to work with, and you're really niched in your area of expertise, they'll keep coming back to you in
Mm.
multiple publications. So I teach
Mm.
all of that in the Media Magnet. And then of course it's how do you utilize that credibility to increase your rate. So I actually walk through the business implications as well.
Something every business needs, I'm telling you. It's huge for all the reasons that we talked about. Okay, I have loved this conversation. It's always such a good reminder for me. I have all my little notes, Rebecca. It's so selfish of me. And so the reason why I podcast is to have people on like you who can help me get out in the world as well. And you guys, I hope that this really helped you and gave you a couple really tangible takeaways, because she gave us so many things that we can integrate without having to do anything at all, let alone how much value I know her products add. And you also have a really great event called the Pitch Club that I got to speak at.
Yes.
Tell me about the Pitch Club.
Yes. So, well, the pitch club is kind of the umbrella that all this is under. And I like to say you can't pitch yourself if you don't believe in yourself. But
Mm.
sometimes we lose that belief. So the pitch club is here to like bolster you up. And so not only do we have those programs, but we have, I have a mastermind and I have a group business coaching program, but it all comes together at Weekend at the Pitch Club. This will be our 4th event. And it is going to be in Scottsdale, September 13th and 14th, or 12th and 13th, 2024. If you're listening to this after, just check our 2025 date. And all of that's on my website at RebeccaCafiero.com. But the beautiful thing about the event is there's a lot of strategy. There's a lot of soul care. I mean, I'm very much like, you have to be the human being breathing life into your business. So we make it really fun. But the other really unique thing that's different than other events I've been to is I have a lot of media there. So last year we had journalists there, we had producers there, we had podcast hosts there. Almost everybody walks away with either a contact or a win. Last year, Catherine, who was in the mastermind and Chris's mastermind with me, she connected with one of my other speakers who was a Forbes contributor, and it landed her in Forbes. And that was just because they built a relationship and they had a conversation. So you could walk away with business, you could walk away with visibility, and most importantly, you're going to walk away with a lot of belief.
It's such a great event. The women in the room just literally blew my mind. Plus, I'm like, how are you all so fashionable? I was like, this is such a great looking room. What is going on? It was just the best, literally the best time, with really, like, the women added a lot of value. So you guys are not only going to get it from the stage, but you're also going to get it from the participants as well, which is so cool. All right, you guys, definitely go check out all the show notes for all of this. Everything that we talked about is linked below. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on. It's been so much fun just having you in our worlds for so long. And I can tell you, just like, we have you in the room at the dinner series, and so many people are so excited to meet you because of the value you help add to all of their businesses while they're in the room, which is so cool. You've just, whatever room you've been in, people have talked about you and all the value that you bring. So it's so wonderful to have you on the podcast. You're such just a great human, and I'm so grateful for you. So thank you so much for coming on. And you guys definitely go check out the show notes, and I'm so grateful for you as well. And until next time, earn your happy. Bye, everyone.